Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is the final panel in the Grad School Week series, the season finale, if you will. My name's Bob McMahon, and I'm a senior career coach at the University Career Center. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. First, make sure you logged into this event through your Handshake account. It'll allow us to keep in touch with you after the event. And second, please be aware this event is being recorded. Now, we started off this week with a workshop about crafting an effective personal statement. Next, we had experts from grad school entrance exams who shared some of their best practices that you can follow in the event that you need to prepare for one of those tests, and they highlighted some resources that are available to Temple students. Yesterday, I brought together a panel of current Temple University grad students to share their thoughts about how they prepared, described what it's really like in a program, and answered your questions as well. Today, with the help of the Temple Professional Network, I've assembled a panel of recent alums from Temple University graduate degree programs. You'll see their degrees span a variety of programs, and they work in interesting fields now. Panelists, why don't you introduce yourselves as you're listed on the screen here, and tell us what degrees you do have, where they're from, and a little bit about your current role.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amari Evans. I am a two-time Temple graduate, but my master's was a Master's of Education in Adult and Organizational Development from the College of Ed and Human Development. I am now currently an Event and Communications Manager at Meeting Solutions, Inc. My various degrees have allowed me to be extremely successful in my current role, building up to a manager at my current in my current role, and I am excited to be here today. And I'll popcorn it over to Nicole.
Thanks. Hi everyone. I'm Nicole Henninger. My degree is in media and communication with a specialization in neuroscience. So that's from the Media and Communication School with affiliations over at Fox and the psychology department in CLA. And I am currently in a senior research role at a local newspaper, the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I've been there for close to 2 years. So I also can speak to working while finishing your degree too. Happy to be here. I'll pass it over to Tatiana.
Hi all, thanks Nicole. Tatiana Motevalli-Oliner. I am currently the Assistant Athletic Director for Campaign Strategy at Syracuse University Athletics. I came to Temple as an employee, actually, in the athletics department, working for TU Athletics, and decided I wanted to get my degree while I was there. So I can speak a little bit to working full-time as well, similar to Nicole, and I'm sure everyone. I got my undergrad at Emerson College in marketing communications and was, like I said, already working in the field of sports management when I got to Temple. But my degree definitely helped me kind of elevate my expertise, make me feel a little bit more collected in terms of where I wanted to take my undergrad and my early experience, and then how I could grow that within the field. I left Temple, but I'm actually now back as an adjunct professor in STHM as well, in the same master sports program, sports business. So it's nice to be home.
I'm Patrick Walters. I graduated from the Media and Communication PhD program in May. My experience at Temple was wonderful. I came to Temple while initially I spent 15 years working in daily journalism at the Associated Press, and I had transferred into academia. I was working at Kutztown University teaching journalism, and along the way I just decided to enter the PhD program. So I too was, like others, working full-time and teaching and going to school full-time. Starting in July, I left Kutztown and am now an assistant professor teaching journalism at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. So I'm happy to answer any and all questions that can be helpful to you all. Nice to be here.
That's great. Excellent introductions. Sets us up nicely to get started. Today's session will be organized like this. I'm going to ask some questions that I have to our group. I suspect many of you in the audience have these questions too, because we often hear them asked to us as career coaches when we meet with students thinking about graduate school. However, towards the end of the hour, we're going to open up the floor for any questions that you may have in the audience. You can ask them through the chat, through the Q&A, on Zoom, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can pop up on screen and chat directly with any or all of the folks towards the end here. So let me get set up by first stop sharing. So now we can see everybody in a bigger view. And let me get my notes going. Put this to the side. All right. Great. So the first question that I think I want to start off with for all of you, and we'll figure out a way to answer them in a second, but what motivated you to attend graduate school in the first place? So maybe let me start with Tatiana. That's an interesting field you're in, and you had a very specific kind of career trajectory. So what motivated that decision?
Great question. So obviously working in college sports, I was a student athlete myself, and then I wanted to give back to the same kind of program that, made me who I was. And I knew I wanted to be in higher education space and in athletics. But when you are on a campus and you're working with student athletes and you're talking about the importance of, providing scholarships to give student athletes opportunities for education, it also is important to understand the value of education. So being on a campus and seeing that and seeing our student athletes work so hard, I knew, I would be missing an opportunity to go back to school and get an additional degree. And Temple provided me that opportunity as an employee. So it was a no-brainer. When I looked at programs that I knew I wanted to participate in, there are very few that have, a business master's that is focused specifically on sports and sports management. And knowing the prestige of both SDHM and Fox Business School, and knowing how those departments work together during that MS Sports Business program, it was super unique. So there was a very short list of programs that had sports business masters, and then also provided me an opportunity to grow my career while taking classes. So it was a no-brainer for me to come to Temple.
Cool. And Patrick, you too have a kind of an interesting path into it. So I'm curious, there had to have been a motivation to make such a change. What was your motivation to attend graduate school?
It's a dual motivation. So there is, I think what Tatiana said, absolutely 100%. I also had a very practical motivation. I had an MFA in creative nonfiction after spending the 14 years in journalism. And that got me close to far enough in academia. But once I'd gotten, I think, a year away from tenure, I was told that the MFA was not going to be treated as a terminal degree. And they kind of had changed the policy. So I was annoyed, but also I think it was sort of one of those situations where it kind of lit that fire, and it was like, well, I could do the bare minimum and get you the extra credits that you want, or I could just do this and build on my experience with the PhD. So to me, it was both the sort of the positive of wanting to become a true scholar in a field that I had practiced in for a long time, but also I was nudged strongly in the sense that I love the MFA as a degree, but if you are going into academia, there's going to be roadblocks if you don't do the PhD. That's what I ran into. And again, I want to clear that that's not any disrespect to any other degrees, but that's the scenario that I encountered. It was hard work, but I honestly never regretted it.
That's interesting. And I should interject for a second to all of the panelists. By all means, this is a no holds barred answer. Honestly, we want, the straight information to come out. So it's not even a sales pitch to encourage people to go to Temple for grad school. It's just that idea of graduate school in general and those experiences. So feel free to let loose and as you see fit. And I should tell the audience, I haven't prepared the panelists with most of these questions. I gave them a general framework, but they're answering on their feet. So just so you don't think this is a scripted reality show. So Amari, speaking of interesting paths, so tell us, what motivated you to attend graduate school?
For me, when I was approaching my senior year, I felt like I wasn't done yet with my education. So I'm from Bermuda, just so everyone knows that. And there aren't many opportunities in Bermuda, especially if you don't have certain degrees. And so I thought it would be best for my personal career path to go directly into my master's program, but I didn't want it to be a redundant degree. So I didn't want to do another business degree because that's what my undergrad was in. And so I think that's probably the main reason I stayed at Temple as well, is because there were so many different degrees that fit well into my business degree. So sure, but
Gotcha. Nicole, how about you?
I'm a little all over the place with this question. So when I got my master's degree, I was a K-12 teacher and I was switching industry. So I switched from K-12 education to media and communication. And so that was like a career switch, was the reason why I got the degree. When I started my PhD program, I really didn't think I was going to get in to any program, and I got rejected from every other program that I applied to, which is very interesting because I had applied to Temple too in the past at the same program and got rejected. So like, I think that's a good testament where you can get accepted into a program you were formally rejected in. And so I came back, honestly, like I was really bored in the industry I was in. I thought maybe if I did some interesting research, it would like help my interests more and like make work more exciting for me. But in that same way, it also took me a really long time to graduate. So I ended up being here a lot longer than a lot of other students are. The typical PhD journey is between like 4 to 5 years, and I was here 7. So it did take me like longer to graduate, but I don't regret that because I wouldn't be able to have my current job without this degree. So I think for me, it was kind of like, I came in not with a direction. I don't advise that because you do waste a lot of money doing that. You waste a lot of time that you could be working full time, especially if you're in a full-time program where you can't be accepted unless you're full time. A lot of PhD programs are like that. But it has helped me in the long run.
That's some good information. In fact, you've touched on a couple of the upcoming questions, so we'll have a chance to expand out on some of these ideas. I know a question that I personally have encountered a number of times in sessions with students exploring grad school is a timeline decision. Should I just keep going, senior year undergrad, roll right into a graduate program, or should I take a break? What did each of you do, and how do you feel about that decision? Would you have changed it? Pros, cons, just really about that timeline. And I would imagine, I know from a few of you that there is a gap. So I'd like to hear about that. Anybody feel like jumping off right away?
I'll go ahead. So like I mentioned, I went straight into my master's program from undergrad. And that's because I was clear about what I wanted to do with that degree. So I would say it really depends. That's the answer. It depends on what you're looking for. There's no set timeline. You can go whenever you think it's best. I want to piggyback off of what Nicole said, is you just want to have an idea, so you're not wasting your time and money, of course. So it's totally up to you how that fits into your timeline, career-wise, personal-wise. And for me, it fit very well to go directly into it. So.
Yeah, I'll chime in as well. You know, I was pretty early in my career, but I also immediately started working in college sports. And so I thought that was the trajectory I wanted to go in, but I think it would be very unique if someone stayed in the same career their entire life. So I didn't want to immediately get a degree in something also about sports and then find myself pigeonholed based on my experience and my degree. So I thought working in the industry for a couple of years to really confirm this is exactly the path I want to stay in was important, and taking that time to actively participate, be in the industry, and then say, okay, yep, I'm going to double down and get the degree that matches kind of what I'm currently doing. But I will say, finding a program that was flexible with me once I was admitted was really important as well, because I didn't want to have to stop working. To Nicole's point, I wanted a program that I could do part-time. I wanted a program that wouldn't limit me if I wanted to move and work in a different institution. College sports is, early in your career, you move a lot. I think that's a lot of careers, right? You take a lot of positions, 2 to 3 years. Usually my program, the MS Sports Business, is a 2-year program. For me, it took 3.5. And that's because halfway through, I took a different job and I moved to a completely different state on the West Coast with completely different time zones. And Temple worked with me to continue my degree and still graduate. So that was also really important, right? The timeline of deciding when to start, but then also knowing, okay, I'm going to pick a program that will allow me to be flexible throughout so that I can keep working, keep learning both in the field and in the classroom, and then adjust accordingly.
Interesting. How about you, Patrick? I know there's an interesting story here.
Yeah, I mean, I would chime in on, all these are really good insights. And I think to me, like coming out of college, I came out of undergraduate in 1999, and I never thought about academia. I was like, I want to practice journalism for my whole career. I just want to do the thing. And so for me, going to Temple, like once I got to that point, I think initially I was of the mindset of like, I'm just going to take my time. I'm working full time. I'm married. I had 2 kids, and I was like really stressed about that aspect of things, not wanting to get kicked out of my household and not wanting to like let people down. So that was all on my mind. And I was thinking, well, let me just take my time. I think the interesting part was, I think a lot of faculty members really kind of encouraged me in a sense of like, you can do this faster. And I kind of, but it was said to me in a way that didn't feel like pressure. And I was initially thinking, let me just do 6-7 years. The money was on my mind, spending wise. And so I ended up finishing it in 4. That was not my initial plan. And so again, I think what the point is here is like, plans are made to be broken. For me, like, I just sort of felt like once I saw that was possible, and you can't claim credit for everything. Some things broke in my direction, right? I fully acknowledge that. In some senses, the pandemic broke in my direction in the sense of my 3.5-hour commute to work 4 days a week suddenly was 0. So I think that was sort of I expected to go the longer route. And then when I saw the possibility was there to finish early and to like stop accumulating debt, I said, you know what, I'll try to do that as long as my head doesn't explode. So I think you just have to be ready to roll with it and to build on what others have said. This may sound idealistic, but like to the extent that you can, do it in the way that facilitates what you want to do in your research and your work. Right now, I don't mean that to sound like some sort of like, oh, just take your time. Like, no, time is money and money is money. But make those decisions based on what's best for your career and your personal situation and your financial situation, and you've got to balance all 3 of those and everything. So,
Nicole, anything?
Yeah, I want to shout out 4+1 programs. I was enrolled in one and didn't go to it, but I didn't go to it because I decided I didn't want to stay in higher education. So that would have been an education for me. However, if I knew that I wanted to stay in K-12 for even 10 years, that degree would have paid itself off. 4+1 programs are great. They save you a lot of money. They save you a lot of time. And I found, unless you're going into academia or going to a company that values where your degree's from, which in most sectors doesn't matter, it's worth doing a 4+1 program. I took off time in between both degrees. I will say I encourage any student who's thinking of a PhD program to take time off, because in the corporate world, you learn a lot of soft skills that you're going to need for your PhD, like project time and people management, that will get you through the program more efficiently and faster. that for me were easy because I had taken time off, but I saw a lot of people who went straight through struggle with those things. So I think that like shout out to 4+1 programs, but if you're going for a PhD, like take time off. You're also going to need time to save money because you really don't make money during a PhD program. You make just enough on a stipend to kind of like get by in the city that you're in, like realistically. And normally a lot of programs have limits on other sources of income. That's something that I didn't know, whereas like if you take a fellowship, you can't have another source of income. So I think that that's something that you have to be like, as a first gen student, college student period, like was really just didn't know at all until I came into this being like, oh, okay, now I have to budget for less than 40 grand a year for the whole year in the city of Philadelphia. So I think that's something to think about, especially for the longer term programs. I actually chose my master's program because of it was only a year. So I knew that, okay, I can like afford this in the future. And I planned for it for a year going into it. So I think that that time off really helps you ground you to like get you ready to get back into the program. But if you know what industry you're in and there is a 4+1 or some kind of like extension, I totally tell people to try it out, because you can always try it out for a semester and then not do it and still get the credit. So it's not really wasting a ton of money that way.
That's some valuable insight about the financial aspects of it to think about for sure. So I kind of thinking now, okay, you've got the degree and it's the next day. Now, in some cases, you may have already been working, like in Tatiana's case, but I think it still might apply, this question. So upon reflection, having that graduate degree, did it help or hinder any sort of job search that you were undergoing? So was it worth it, right? Or did it become an obstacle? Or do you see that as an obstacle perhaps in the future? Maybe you're going to change again, who knows?
I mean, I'm happy to go first on that, because the answer from my direction just was, it was a no-brainer type thing. It was, if I was going to get another job in higher education, from what I was looking for, I needed to have the PhD. The whole status of ABD once you've defended your, like, okay, fine, that opened doors where people would look at you and say, okay, this person's possibly going to finish this degree. And so to me, the job that I took was contingent on finishing the PhD. So it was kind of like, it wasn't even a debate. It was, one of the things that I learned, and, Bob said, no holds barred. This is not, but I mean, the idea of like, with an MFA, like, yeah, it got me a certain distance combined with extensive practical experience. But the reality was, I was always having to apologize. I was always, people would always point out like, oh, well, you don't have this. And like, okay, I mean, whatever. But I think, so to me, it was finishing the degree. Like, I had to send the transcripts even like before being hired to show that not only had I had to send it before and after defending the dissertation. So, I mean, yeah, it wasn't even a debate. Mine was pretty clear cut. It was a contingency of my hire was contingent on the PhD. It did mean, however, that after defending my dissertation, instead of celebrating, like Fab told me to, I had to drive to Lexington, Virginia to look at real estate. So I never really celebrated, but yeah, I think it was in that sense a no-brainer if you're going into academia. But again, that's only in that one circumstance. That's other worlds, like academia is a weird like world. So I'd add that caveat.
Yeah, and to that point, like, I'm not in traditional academia, but I'm on a campus, an institution of higher education. So for me, I definitely think no brainer. It gives me credibility when I'm talking to colleagues, especially in my role when I'm constantly working with colleagues across campus and not just in athletics. And when I'm talking to student athletes and coaches and motivating them to, continue being student athletes and student first, right? So it absolutely gives me credibility. The one thing I would say, and, looking back, maybe would have done differently is picking less of a niche program, right? So I loved that our program was sports business, and I got to take a lot of classes that were not sports specific, but also it is sports business. So at the end of the day, if I were to decide to get out of sports industry, I know I have transferable skills to other business and marketing sectors, but my degree still has that sports in it. So it is something, to Patrick's point, I have to explain and kind of give credibility to. And I think there's a lot of ways around that, but also, again, it was why I went to Temple, because I wanted that niche program. So it's got, double-edged sword for sure, but that's the only hindrance I think I can think of.
Amari, it looks like you have something to say.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about it because I graduated at the very beginning of the pandemic. I graduated in 2020, May of 2020. And so I'm just thinking about whether if we were in the middle of that, would I have had a different experience? Because a lot of people were on hiring freezes at that time. So I was working whilst getting my degree. And so I think for me, the experience was more using it as I was going through the program and less about after the program. Of course, I did end up leaving once people started hiring again. But I will say that during that search, even though I wasn't like actively trying to leave my job, a lot of people were telling me I was overqualified for the roles I was applying for, but didn't have enough experience to get to the next step. So what I was doing was kind of just going slow with getting to the next role that I was hoping to obtain. So getting as much experience as I could in the role that I was in when I had graduated, so that I could potentially take that next step. And I mean, now I'm not even in a role very specific to what I do, but because I work in such a small company, I'm able to use both my undergrad and master's degree in a small sense of different pieces. So it really, I think it depends on how you look at it. And then also you're not probably going to be in a pandemic at the end of your grad degree like I was. So yeah. So yeah.
Sure. You bring up an interesting point, and it's a phrase that I hear often: over-credentialed and under-qualified. I think that is something to think about as considering graduate school, how that can play out. Nicole, I see your head shaking. You have something, I think, to add.
Yeah, I fit that bill. When I was looking for a job, definitely can relate to Amari in that way. The one thing that saved me was, like, to speak to what Tatiana said a little earlier, is that I had even though my degree was specific, I had a very generalist level of research training in both tracks of the predominant methodologies. So that's what got me the job. One of the reasons I stayed at Temple so long is because I ended up being trained in these like two different research tracks, just because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but it ended up helping me because then I had these technical skills that I wouldn't have had. So I will say, like, if there are any types of technical skills that you can get that will be generalist, get them. Like any type of computer science, computing skill, any type of data analysis, like even if that's not what your degree's in, any type of product management, like, because these things can be applied in other industries. And I will also say, I felt like the biggest thing that I wish I had done in my PhD program that I didn't even know existed was apply for summer internships in industry. Because my biggest thing that I was hearing was like, well, you have all this research training, but you don't have any industry experience. And so for me, that was the big drawback in like interviewing, is that like, oh, well, we know you can do the research, but like you don't have any, at least in my field, like no product experience or no like specific experience in this setting. So, and that's something that I could have easily gotten, but I didn't even know like I was allowed to do internships, or that like I could apply for these, or that they existed, until I was like a 6th-year student. So it was too late for me. So a lot of especially tech companies have summer internships that are specifically for people midway master's or PhD, and they pay very well. They're very competitive, but if you can get an experience like that, I really think that it's worthwhile. because then you do have that industry experience. So you're not underqualified or underexperienced anymore. And that's something I wish I did.
Could I just piggyback off of that? Because I totally agree. My scholarship offered the opportunity with the internship at the same time. So when you were they were paying for your degree, and then during the summers or during your longer breaks, you were able to go in and do an internship with that company. So I would also look for opportunities that offer both of those, because that really helped me out during my master's program.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, I think athletics is kind of unique. We have a lot of graduate assistant positions. It's very common, but you know, at least in my experience being staff at Temple, I noticed a lot of really great like work study, graduate assistant type positions in all sorts of departments, not just athletics. Most of the people in my program were in some sort of Temple employment as well that really helped them, whether it was like true work study or scholarships. So I don't know a lot of other schools to compare it to, but it felt like it was a really uniquely Temple thing, and that they were really actively trying to find financial ways to make students feel less of a burden by employing them and getting great experience at the same time.
I think just to add one sort of supplemental, like what I'm hearing here is a lot of the, like, what are you doing with your summers? And it's such an important question, right? Like, so mine was sort of inverse of that, because when I'm in grad school, everybody was like, wow, you've got all this practical experience. But the phrase that was used a lot, and it was, you're just a practitioner, right? And so like, so think about how that's kind of the inverse of what you're all describing, which it's probably less helpful to this audience. But like for me, it was, okay, I need to spend that time doing scholarship because I'm being told that I am just a practitioner and that I don't know how to research. So when Nicole's describing all these different research, like, yeah, like I was trying to eat that up and using those summers and off time to do and take as much of that coursework stuff and turn it into actual research projects so that it could be like something I could put to work. And in my case, I think if I hadn't done that, it probably would not have enabled, I probably would not have been in as good a position to get the job right at graduation, simply because that was the hole in my background, right? Like, you're always looking to say, well, what's the hole in my background? And for me, it wasn't professional experience, it was research. And so I needed to make sure that my graduate experience worked for me in that area. So I add that simply as just like a different perspective, because like the professional thing, like I didn't need that, but I had a gaping hole elsewhere. And so that's what I had to look at.
That's a really great perspective. Yeah. And it kind of showcases that sometimes the answers to these questions of, you know, when should I start, are, it depends. You know, it really, that is the answer. It's not a satisfying one, but it can very well be the answer. I know my sense is from talking to all of you that this question is probably not one that's going to be too exciting, but let's just find out. Your career plans, did they change while in your specific grad program? Like, did you discover a new direction to go? It seems like for most of you, it was a very, yeah, this is how I'm going, I'm not deviating. Is that a correct assessment? Not for you, Nicole. So, or yeah. But Tatiana, yes, because you were in that field, you were doing that work, and same for you, Amari, right?
Yeah, I definitely continued my trajectory, and it helped reinforce what I was doing. But what I didn't expect was just kind of a rekindling of my love of learning and love of like being truly in a classroom and being a student again. And so like things that I had never considered ever doing, like going back and getting a PhD or doing research or being more like, you know, involved in, you know, other facets of athletics. I never thought I would go that path. And now I'm an adjunct professor at Temple because I just love being in the classroom. So yes, I stayed on the same career trajectory, but it definitely kind of opened my eyes to additional things outside of my like main career that I wanted to pursue. And I have many times toyed with the idea of giving it all up and going back and getting my PhD, because I really did just, you know, re-find a love of learning and research, being on campus and in the classroom again, which was really cool.
Yeah, I think it changed my trajectory a lot, like massively. I mean, I had never really thought about a research agenda before. That's not something that I thought about in the 4 years. You know, I mean, I was in the mindset of like, if I'm doing this, like, I want to like try to like do all this stuff that I haven't done before. And so I think, yeah, you have to sort of make that decision. It also altered things in terms of what doors were opening, and what doors were not. But again, I think that it simply was like the value of not just the love of learning, which I always knew I had. I just never really thought about this whole like, let's study this thing that I did and figure out like why I did it that way, you know, in journalism for all those years. And I think that was the massive way that it changed the direction. And it also, you know, it alters the type of thing. Like you know, then halfway through the program, I was like, well, yeah, I'm going to go to an R1 research university, and that's what I'm going to do. And then like, but then when you look at the options and you look at it, like what I ended up doing was going to a much better situation. It was not an R1 situation, but it was an area where I've been able to push forward with research in a way that I was not able to do while teaching a 4-course load a semester, and being a full-time graduate student. But it is, you know, I think that is one of those things too, where you just don't want to close off an option just because you're dead set on X. I was wide open to other possibilities. This was, you know, when a door opened and I was like, well, I'm going to look really hard in that one.
Nicole, I know you're the perfect piggyback to Patrick's points here.
Yeah, I mean, I very much went into my program like with a goal of a specific type of university. So like most people who go into PhD programs formerly would go in to become professors, but that's not really the case as much currently anymore. A lot of people are going in just to go into industry, we're finding. And the reason for that is because recently there are not enough faculty jobs to cover the number of graduates coming out of programs. And that's just the realism of the scenario. And I realized this about year 4 for me. So I was like in the stage of dissertation, still wanted to be a professor at a university, but also realized that I wasn't willing to compromise on things I would have had to, like moving my family to another location, salary requirements, not working over like summers or things like that. Like, so for me, and I also was not competitive enough for the types of jobs that I wanted publication wise. And I realized this kind of like at the point where, okay, so now I need to think about if I'm not going to do this, do I want to wait another year so that I will be competitive because my publications are finally going to come out? So I take a year off and then just keep applying on the cycle? Or do I look for like another sector of work? So at that point, for me, it was like, okay, what can I use these skills for that aren't a professor job? I can always come back. So I'm still like affiliated with my lab at Temple. I still do research there. I just like don't get paid for it anymore. But I don't need to get paid for it because industry jobs pay a lot better. So I think it's just kind of like what works for you at that time. Like for me, I just really wasn't willing to move out of the city of Philadelphia. So that really limited the places I could go. And I think that we're seeing that landscape change a lot. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with changing your trajectory like totally midway. And because you need to find whatever works for you. And the degree was still useful to me.
That's great. Amari, anything?
Yeah, so I had a clear plan, a career path for the master's that I picked. My undergrad was in HR, so I wanted to be on the training side and the talent side of HR. And so I purposely picked a degree that wasn't business. Like I mentioned, I didn't want to do business again, but would very much help me in that, in those roles or to get into those potential roles. And so I think that goes back to me saying that I picked a role that I know I could grow in to get to stay in to be able to use that degree. And so I think I was clear at that moment, and, you know, graduating, I was pretty clear. Right now, I'm not in that that role that I had intended when I had gone into that degree, but I do think I'll find my way back, and that's my plan. So
Cool. So I'm going to pose one last question to the group before we open the floor up for our audience to ask questions. And let's just set aside for a moment career, employment expectations, and just think about the educational experience you had going through your programs. As you were doing that, did the program, your participation in that program, change the way you see the world or think about things in the world, you know, just from that perspective, not this is about my job or the future job, but did anything change mentally in that way for any of you? Amari, it looks like you're ready to jump through the screen, so go.
oh yeah, I think I absolutely loved my program, and I think it totally changed how I saw the world. And I think I just want to give a shout out to the AOD program. Like, there's one class called Systems Dynamics that literally like blew my mind the entire class. Like, I could not function in that class. And then now I'm like, this makes sense. This makes sense. I'm so glad I took that class first, because now everything, both like personal and professionally, all like come together, and that totally changed my perspective on a lot of different things. And even moving forward, I kind of am more intentional with certain things, both professionally and personally, because of that class specifically.
Feel free, anybody.
I mean, I spoke to it a little bit before. Being back on a campus really did just rekindle like a lot of excitement about learning new things and just learning. You know, I hadn't been a student in a while, and it was nice to be back in a place that was like mentally stimulating. You know, you mentioned like your personal statements and writing those. I wrote mine about being a student athlete in Boston when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, and how, you know, playing softball for me was my personal, you know, cure of working through that trauma, but then also watching how, you know, the Red Sox helped bring the city back, you know, and helped the city heal. And that was the power of sport, which is why I wanted to get into this industry. But then being on Temple's campus with professors who are actively studying sociology of sport and putting it in that context and using sport for social good and youth development in Philadelphia, just seeing those programs and reading that research, it helped me recontextualize what I was doing every day into the bigger picture. You know, when you're in it, a fast-paced industry like athletics and like sports is, it's really easy just to like get through day to day, get through game day, and forget the bigger picture of what we're doing. But when you're in an academic situation and you're forced to look at it in a bigger context, it reminded me, and it kind of like reinvigorated my passion about learning, but also about the meaning of the work I was doing in my industry, and like reminding me that it's more than just game day. It's really, you know, the power of sport and harnessing that in society to be a better place. So that was really special for me.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with everything Tatiana just said. I mean, the sense of like, for me, I knew I had done the job for a long time, and sometimes when you're doing the job, just like what you were saying, like you're not thinking about the reasons why you're doing X, Y, or Z. You're not thinking about this, and then to compound that, I had been teaching full-time in the classroom for 3 years. And there you can also get too caught up in the sort of like the moment and just looking at the problem in front of you and not taking that step back to look at it as a problematic institution and all the things that are messed up with the thing. And so I think that was some of the huge value for me. You know, I was basically like taking the professor hat off and then stepping into the student role and just sort of doing that all the time. And I felt it was helpful both for my research and for my teaching, just to sort of, it made you stop making assumptions about all kinds of things. And I thought that was very valuable.
I think that's something that Amari said really settled with me. It changed my intentions. Like I had skills that I didn't know that I had that came out in my program in terms of just how I conduct myself in the world. And I will say that the opportunities that I got, not only at Temple, but just from another higher degree, I made some of the best friends that I have in my life still. And I graduated my other degree 10 years ago. And I think that it's exciting to be surrounded with people who are thinking about the world in different ways. It's fun. I don't think anybody would really say like, no, this hasn't changed how I think about the world, because it forces you to be around groups of people that you might not be in everyday life. Start thinking about questions that you usually don't have time to think about because of life and other things. And that's really fun. And it's really, like I said, it's just really exciting. So for me, I feel like totally it changed how I think about, I don't even feel like I'm the same person that from 7 years ago, 8 years ago at this point, that I was when I came in. So.
Excellent. For anyone in the audience that has a question of their own that they want to ask the panel, anyone in particular, all of them, feel free to, oh, here we go. Raise your hand, put it in the Q&A. I'm going to do my best to navigate the various Zoom tools that I need to navigate. So just bear with me. Let's see. Let's allow. Okay, here we go. Here's one.
Greetings, everyone. I just wanted to say this is a great panel. It's lovely to have such a diverse group of people on a panel to talk about graduate school. I wanted to ask, in your opinion, what's some of the most important qualities to have if you want to be a successful graduate student?
Oh, good question.
I have one on this, project and time management and perseverance for rejection. Like if you have those things, you'll be fine, in my opinion.
Yeah, for me, it's self-motivation. So a lot of a master's program is you get it out what you put in. You could probably get away with doing the bare minimum, still get good grades, still get the degree at the end of the day, at least master's. I know PhD is a lot more involved, but it's not worth it, right? You're spending money and time. So if you can self-motivate and find the ways to do that, especially for those who are doing that while working, I teach a class now. We were just talking, Bob and I, my class is 8 to 10 p.m. and my master's students, most of them have worked a full days of work and then they're coming to class. And so I understand fully when they're not as engaged, or when they're super engaged, that's that self-motivation that kicks in to make sure you're getting the most out of the program. So that's probably my best advice.
I think my best advice would be to be open to connection. So with your professors and the students that are in the program with you. There were people in my program that were in their industry for 15, 20 years, and I was in my industry for 1. So like being open to picking their brains, like taking the time out to really figure out why they picked this program and like figure out why like what they're doing with it. And that also helps you figure out your path and can open doors that you probably would have never thought was a possibility with the degrees that you might be thinking about. And then also the professors, like the professors always want to help you to grow. I think the best advice I got was, so your undergrad degree is like this. So you're gaining a lot of knowledge, a vast amount of knowledge in small pieces, but your master's and your PhD degree is like this. So a lot of depth. So you want to keep going down as much as you can. So utilizing all those resources it would be beneficial to you.
Are you good there, Shakib?
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, you're quite welcome. All right. Now here, one came in through the chat from Monet. I don't know if you can see it on your screen. I'll read it to you. How did you prepare for grad school mentally, and were your expectations accurate? That's a good question.
For me, I actually asked people that were in the program before I committed to it. I asked them what their goals were and why they picked that program, and if they're enjoying the classes. I think for me, I really want to have opportunities to get into classes that I otherwise wouldn't have considered getting into, and why they were beneficial. So just, I think taking advantage again of your resources, who you can speak to. You can talk to the program director, which another thing I did, and that's how I prepared. It wasn't what I expected, and I think that's a great thing. I, again, absolutely enjoyed my entire experience in my degree, and it helped me a lot more than I thought it was, to be completely honest. So
I mean, I don't know if this sounds too idealistic, but I mean, part of the preparation thing goes back to the earlier question of like, okay, you ask yourself, am I doing this for self-motivated reasons? If I'm doing it for reasons that are partially because I have to, and mine was kind of split, right? It was kind of like, okay, I kind of have to do, but if I did it solely because it was something that I had to, like I was going to be bitter, cynical, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that you kind of, for me, preparation was having to get myself in the mind frame of, yes, I'm doing this because there's a practical need. And I see there's a question in the chat about like, thinking about going to graduate school to get a better job, or can I do without it? Like, yeah, I was like, okay, I need to do this to either keep my job or get a better job. But I also had to keep in mind as the preparation that if I'm not doing this for myself, then I'm going to get burned out and angry really fast. And so again, that's sort of a mental, I'm married to a therapist, so maybe that's why I'm saying that. But I think that is that sort of mental mindset of asking yourself, why am I doing this? And if you're doing it partly because you have to, you want to also be thinking about, okay, what are the reasons that I want to do this? Because there's always a way out of something if you don't want to do something. Like you can find a way not, you can find a way around it and everything, and you can do that. But you got to make sure that you actually like there's part of you that wants to do it. And so I think that's sort of my mental preparation aspect.
It's a hard question. I've been thinking about it. I'm not really sure if I don't know what my expectations were going in, truly, to be able to say if it met my expectations. But I think the one thing that surprised me the most was just like the vast difference in terms of the types of professors and the types of classes within my program. I felt like I had a good sense of like what I was going to get, and I assumed kind of would all be comparable. And then I would have a teacher who's like actively still in the industry and very practitioner based and very skills. And then I would have a class that's, a tenured professor with this just really like fundamental thought and philosophy and sociology and like big picture concepts. And I don't know that I was expecting that type of diversity of class and diversity of thought. That was surprising to me. I don't know why. I feel like that's pretty common in academia, but maybe I'd just been out of school for so long that I didn't realize. But that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, I think for me, like I did not prepare myself well, and my expectations were very misaligned with my actual experience. So this kind of goes into a question that I saw later in the chat, which I think I didn't realize how self-motivated PhD programs were, where you go to classes, but you are learning your technical skills on your own. You're not really like led in a lab in a class like an undergrad. It's very different. Like you're doing it outside of class. And I didn't realize like that was the expectation. And another thing is that, especially in the PhD world, in order, like if you're feeling burnout, even just in a program, you need to set clear boundaries and stick to them. So if you have a family at home, you don't have to work at 10 o'clock at night. You can work during a 9-to-5 schedule or whenever is good with your kids. Maybe it's late at night after they go to sleep or something like that. Like you need to stick to that. And not everyone will respect those boundaries, but you need to hold firm to them. And that's something that I didn't really do well, which led to me really burning out in the middle of my program too. So that's some advice that I would give that I think would have helped me a lot. And give stuff up. Like you don't have to say yes to everything, because people will continually try to use your labor. And you think like, oh, this is a good opportunity. I need to do this. I need to do this project and this project. No, like stick to like a couple projects, 2 max, and like just get it done. I think I wish I would have taken that advice.
That flows nicely into actually a question from Carter, and then I see you also, Chanel, in the chat, so we won't forget about you. But Carter's question is so on point. Tips for fighting burnout. Carter's midway through an MPH program, Masters of Public Health, and struggling with deep mental fatigue. Let me just kick off with saying, hey, you're not alone. I imagine all of us are going to say, yeah, been there, done that. But tips for fighting burnout, any of those?
Temple also offers free counseling for you. So you can get a certain amount of sessions a semester for free. I totally recommend doing that. Sorry, I just want to like put that in there because that is something that we have through Title.
You don't have to be married to a therapist, is what you're saying. It's great if you are, though.
Yeah, well, I wanted to build off. I saw Carter's point in there, and it's such an important question, and it builds off of what Nicole was saying about boundaries, because I did a horrible job of setting boundaries. And my approach was like, I don't know if I would do it differently or not, but I was like, okay, I'm in this for this period of time. I'm going to exhaust myself. I don't know if it was the smartest thing to do, but I wanted to follow that guidelines, but I didn't. In terms of the burnout part that Carter's asking about, I had really clear, there were a few things that I didn't let go of. And one was I did make sure that there were certain times that I carved out that I did not get distracted by work. They were very small amounts of time that I wanted to spend with friends or family. The other thing that I did that I think kind of preserved my sanity was like, I maintained a brutal exercise regimen during the time period. And it went against all logic, but it was kind of, and again, it was aided by the pandemic in the sense of, I found that physical exertion helped me to manage the stress. Like I'm a high anxiety person, and I was like, whoa. And so as not to overtax the therapist wife, like I thought that for me, that physical exertion was helpful. It was hard because there's only so many hours in the day. For me personally, that was helpful, but I would second, third, fourth, and fifth what Nicole said about taking advantage of the counseling availability at a university. It's so important. Again, son of a counselor and married to a different counselor. The idea of having that outlet is so important, because if you don't keep in touch with the fact that you are approaching burnout, you're going to be like, screw this. I can just remove this pressure and ease it all. And so I think those things are very important.
Any burnout from Tatiana or Amari, or was it pretty smooth sailing?
I think for me, it was, I was like studying what I was also doing every day. And so for me, the burnout was just like overwhelming amount of content about one thing. And I felt very one-dimensional. So it almost is, it's going to sound opposing to what Patrick and Nicole just said, but it's not. In that for me, it was like, okay, I'm on a university campus with this incredible diversity of thought and leaders and experiences that I can make adjacent to what I'm doing. So it was like finding ways to remind me why I was working in sports and like where the passion lied. So I'd like volunteer for other projects outside of it. So that sounds like taking on more, which is the opposite of what they're suggesting, but it was just finding something to remind me like why I was doing it in the first place. Because otherwise I was so tunnel vision and just felt like, oh my God, I'm living and breathing this one topic every day, all day. And that was really hard. I don't know if that makes sense. But.
No, I don't think it makes total sense. I also think it's not totally going against that, right? I mean, I'm saying I didn't do a very good job of setting boundaries, but I think part of Tatiana's advice is, to me, like really complex and important, right? If you're getting so engrossed in this theoretical aspect of things, I rolled my eyes really quickly at that, like in the cloud stuff, because I'm like, I believe in practical stuff. So to be able to balance that with other things where I could see it in action, that mattered. And so I think it gets down to like, yeah, you want to pick what other kinds of projects you're going to do, but when picking those, make sure it's ones that's help you see the work that you're doing for sort of in a real way.
Much more articulate than me. Thank you, Patrick.
Carter, I guess what we can all say is hang in there. talk to somebody. I know sometimes just talking to people in your cohort is enough to gripe and vent, can help feel better. And I've heard this in today's panel and yesterday's panel from current students, the same thing. You have to carve out time intentionally where you're not doing the work. Now that can be harder in some cases, like you're going to school and working simultaneously, which seems almost like doubling the opportunity for burnout, but figuring out a way to do that is gonna, I mean, it's a universal thing. Anyone that you talk to that's been through this will say that. Now, I don't want to forget about Chanel's question, because I think it's an interesting one that we also encounter in the Career Center sometimes. The impression that going to graduate school is how you're going to get a, quote, better job. I'm going to assume that better means more money. Maybe not, but I think that's kind of like the universal understanding of it. So if I don't go to grad school, I just kind of made a big mistake. This person's in public health and planning to go to CCP to get a nursing degree as an extra to the education. So I guess if I distill that for all of you, how about that idea of grad school as a path to a better job? What do you think about that?
Something that's I saw recently that I think is really helpful in this context is the degree that you're going for. This is like the monetary part's more for PhD for the number of years. Is the degree that you're going for, or is that time worth giving up $200,000? Because over the course of 5 years, that's about how much you're giving up in earning power. So that's something to think about when you're planning your degree, or thinking about, should I just stay in this field and work for 5 years or 2 years or whatever it is. Certain fields are going to have an expectation for an advanced degree. And I don't think an advanced degree in most contexts will hurt you, other than that like overqualified problem, but it might not earn you as much as you think. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think some fields need it. There's a lot of people with my job title who don't have a PhD. The level of work that we can do is different, but we're still getting paid the same way. So that's something to think about too.
Yeah, I would echo, it's entirely dependent on the industry you're in, right? So I don't know much about the health sector, but for me, okay, on an academic campus, yes, if I check that box, I'm probably in a different tier in terms of employment opportunities and salary level and bands and all of that. But could I have gotten the job? Probably, right? With or without it. Now, is there a ceiling? I think yes, absolutely. There's some positions I can't even apply to because I don't have a master's, or if I hadn't had a master's. But there's also very different, right? Like in business, I think there's a lot of opportunity. It is entrepreneurial. You can talk your way into a lot of rooms and prove the soft skills are transferable, whether or not you have a degree. And if you can prove that worth outside of needing that, then why not, save yourself some money and time. But I don't know that that's true across all industries for sure. And I also think it is a grounds for learning those soft skills. So if you don't already have them, sometimes a graduate program is a great way to learn them, because you have to learn project management, you have to learn people management, you have to learn time management. So that would be kind of my answer to that. But I think it's entirely dependent on your industry.
It's sort of to build on that with Chanel's question. I think one of the practical things you want to do is look at the current job postings of particular types of jobs that you're asking for. Look at the minimum, look at the requirements that they have. But the big caveat there is also think about how they can change, right? So like what's going to be most persistent over time in terms of as a credential. For me, even though it's a different industry, my example was, okay, when I first went to get a master's, I was like, oh, look, an MFA qualifies someone to teach at a college level because it's a terminal degree. Well, the way that the MFA was perceived in the academic world changed dramatically in the 10 years after I earned one. And there were a lot of factors there, but the criteria changed, and subsequently the job descriptions changed too. So I think there you want to study what those requirements are of jobs that you'd be looking to want to have, but also thinking to yourself a couple steps ahead, if that changes, what's the other thing they could say I would need that I don't have now? So that's just the sort of skeptical part of me giving you that advice.
Mhm.
I totally agree with what everyone has mentioned. I also want to note that there are some companies, industries that if you're in a certain role and you know you want to take the next step in your career, they'd be willing to assist with paying for that degree so that they can help you get to the next level. So, if you wanted to take some time to really think about going into a graduate degree, you can kind of figure out where you are looking to go if you're in a current role right now, see what the opportunities are and what the next step in your career, what they require. So, and if that is a graduate degree, then you can consider it. Otherwise, don't waste your time and money if you don't need to. Yeah.
Solid advice. Solid advice. Chanel, I hope that answered your question. If not, feel free to pop back in. No, looks like a thank you. Okay, anyone else? I'm going to do a going once, going twice, going three times kind of thing in a second here. Going once, going twice, going three times. All right, I appreciate it. I want to give a shout out to all of the panelists today for taking time out of your day. We know you all obviously are working somewhere, doing exciting, fun things, and probably have to get back to doing that. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with the university here, the students thinking about graduate school. It's important. It's an important decision. I think that's a common theme that we have seen come through here. And I think you provide a lot of great food for thought. So thank you, panelists, for joining us and accepting my offer to come join us. And thank you to all the attendees as well. This will conclude our week of grad school programming. And I hope you enjoyed it. And of course, feel free, if anyone has questions afterwards, you can reach out to the Career Center, schedule a session with me or any of the other coaches, and we'd be happy to talk. All right, thanks, everybody.